Welcome back. Yeah, as has been mentioned, Rob mentioned, I'm really passionate about the preservation of your industry, you know, of our industry. My background is my father and 3 older brothers, all stone layers, so we go back a long, long way. We're not going to try and reinvent the wheel, but we're going to try and teach you, or just give you some recognition of what's kind of taking place in the industry and what we see, the problems that we see, and just how we can overcome those problems and try and make your jobs as successful as possible. So that's what today's kind of going to be about. Like for me, I don't want to, and these guys don't want to see, black concrete put in and have saw cuts put into it and people say that's paving. It's not what we want to see. We want to see actual stone going down. The reason why we started this, I've been with Mapei for 30 years this year, and the reason why we started these kind of sessions is because I just was coming across so many issues in the industry, or having so many phone calls of people saying, I've got drummy tiles or drummy stone, I've got warped stone, that kind of thing. So we started kind of way back then to work out what was going on, and we recognised or identified some issues in the industry, like thin bluestone, for example. I'm sure probably there's a few of you that have been bitten by thin bluestone. Quality of stone, we love working with Granite Works because of they have quality stone. So I'm going to talk about that as well, about why we pay a little bit extra. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can help you, just from a young age of your business to making yourself look a bit more professional and that kind of stuff. So a lot of it's not about Mapei. It's not a full Mapei event. Yes, we're here to give the presentation, but it's not about that. If you've got any throughout the presentation, if you want to ask any questions, just feel free. I know a lot of people don't want to do a public hands up, but there's nothing to hide here. We're all in the same game together. So, and that's the way I see it. I get dragged into a lot of opposition companies will call me up and say, we've got a problem. Can you come and help us? So, and I'm okay with that. I was in Townsville 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, and one of our opposition called me up and said, can you come and help us? We've got a problem. And I went out there it was a big streetscape, and I just went out there and spoke to them and said, well, this is, maybe try this or do this, and we overcame the problem. So as I say, we're kind of here for the betterment of the industry, to make you guys keep being able to lay stone for as long as you want to lay stone. So I've got a nephew coming up in the industry. I want him to be able to be have this industry for as long as possible. So that's kind of what it's about, and that's where we, or I, come from, that's for sure. So as I say, feel free to ask anything you like. Simon asked me before how many of these I do, and I do dozens of them, probably even, they could be almost triple figures every year around the country, across to New Zealand, some of Asia, even over in Italy in September. So it's, we do it, as I say, just to try and make things run more smoothly. So we can't be there always to hold your hand, but we can certainly be there for you if you want us there. So I often say to people, my phone rings 100 times a day, minimum. These guys will be, they're a test to that. When we're driving along in the car, we don't really speak because I'm just bang, 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 So, and that's fine by me. I'm certainly used to it. And but I prefer to speak to people before you start. Even right back at when you're about to quote. Like when I work with the big tier 1 builders, I like they get me in right at tender stage, so that we have an understanding of what the process is going to be, and then an understanding of how to cost that out. So, you know, even giving options, I'll talk about tiered pricing and stuff like that as we go through the program. But, you know, we do it with everything from tunnelling. We're involved. The big thing about Mapei is we're involved in everything from the manufacturing of cement to a rooftop of a high-rise building. So we've got all those products in between, which I'll give you a bit of a look through. So today we're going to go through the work method statements, which I think that's a really good thing for you guys to use. I'll go through that. Waterproofing, adhesive selection, grout, efflorescence, silicon, and yeah, just a bit of the support that's going to go on. So if you feel there's something else, as I say, just jump in. So
hard copies of the work method statements here.
I'll just give you an introduction to Mapei. So that's just a little kind of tiny little snippet of what we do. So, you know, we have, you know, 83 plants around the world. Yeah, we're building our second plant, or it's actually our third plant here in Australia. So we've been in Australia for 31 years, and as Mapei Australia, and we're now building our new plant out in Truganina. So you're going to see actual Melbourne-made products. So we've been manufacturing for 26 years in Australia, but now it's going to be coming out of Melbourne. So even things like all our packaging now is going to go into foils, so plastic, so that you can leave it outside. So you know, it's going to be a pretty big thing for us. 11 products lines is an old slide. We're actually 21 product lines these days. So we've changed a little bit from that, but we do everything from, as I say, from concrete to carpet, timber, vinyl systems. It's but my passion is stone. So that's what we're dealing with today. So, work method statements, I think, are a really good little document that we made up. We made these up about probably 15 years ago, maybe even longer. And we started kind of talking to the likes of you guys of how to use them, so how to look a little bit more professional as such. So these are a really good document, and we do a lot. I do a lot down the surf coast. I surf a lot, so I hang out down there, and a lot of tilers and landscapers come to me down there over the years and said, you know, what else can I do to make myself look different? And so this is something that we came up with about 15 years ago. It's basically it's a step-by-step guide to what you're offering your client. So this one's specifically on landscaping. Specifically on the you know, installation of stone. So, you know, it can be anything. We can modify it to whatever you like as well. They're available. In 30 years I've never been on our website, but I know it's a good website, and I'm hopeless on computers, but they're on there. They are on there. And so what we've kind of taught guys to do is just how to use them. So just, you know, if we're coming along and we're given a quote, and you know, I'm up against Dave, and I come in and say to Mr. or Mrs. Jones, you know, this is my price, and the reason why I'm a little bit more than Dave is because I use these products, you know, like good, better, best. So I go to the best, you know. So it's a pretty simple document that a lot of guys have come up to me after we've introduced these to them and said, mate, I win jobs like that now, you know. So I'm not saying it's the be all and end all, but just another little thing just to make you stand out from the next guy, you know. So, you know, I'm a big believer of, you know, finished trade. So paving, for example, makes what a builder has done look better. You know, so when I had a tiling team, I had quite a few blokes working for me, and builders would say, hurry up, you know. I'd say, hey, I'm going to make your job look good. So, you know, no one walks out into a backyard where you guys have done a beautiful job on paving and goes, geez, the concrete must have been good, or geez, that sub-base must have been good. You know, they're looking at your work and you're making them look good, you know. I went to a job yesterday and I thought the guy was going to come today, but he had an issue with a job with a particular stone that I won't mention the name. But when I first walked in there, I said, wow, this job looks great, you know. And the owner of the property was there, and we were there to look at some cracked stone and some warped stone and stuff like that. And, you know, there was a bad selection of stone, but, you know, he was put into a position where the landscape architect had specified a particular stone. He laid it to the best of his knowledge, and he's ended up with some problems, you know. So the owner of the house went, oh, but we've got problems, you know. I said, well, you know, the only problem that I can see on my first visual of this job is that it looks fantastic, you know. And by the end of the meeting, she actually said, oh, well, maybe we don't need to rip it all out and start again. And I said, of course not. You know, there's ways we can fix these problem areas, and, you know, we discussed it. I wrote up a thing for them yesterday afternoon, and yeah, I'm sure now, instead of a massive demolition of the backyard and all around the pool, all coping on garden beds, it was a pretty involved job, probably about 350 odd metres. Instead of having to rip it all up, now we've come up with a solution to leave most of it there and just address the problems. So, and I reckon, you know, he actually said to me, I reckon you saved it when you came in and went, wow, you know. And I said, well, it's just, you know, sometimes it's people panic and think, oh shit, you know, the sky's falling, and it's not, you know. So that's the kind of thing we can, you know, we can come in and talk to you, and that's, you know, putting people again into a new level. I did say to him, and I've known this guy for a while, I said to him, if you had called me up and said you're laying this particular stone, I would have said, say no, or tell them there's going to be a price rise, because you can lay this particular stone, but it needs different level of laying, which we'll go through the whole process of, you know, how it probably should have been laid. So, yeah, so in the work method statements, we start right at talking about substrate preparation. So it's a big thing that we see that's not done. You know, a simple trick like this, rubbing your hand onto, you know, your concrete, or rubbing your hand onto your wall and looking at your hand. If your hand's dirty, you're not ready to start, you know. So I look after major projects, we look after major projects. We're doing stadiums, shopping centres, whatever, high-rise, you know. One of the first things I say to the likes of the tier one builders is, why are your guys not checking the substrate before these guys start, you know? So I was in Brisbane last week, and I was on a job, and the guy said, oh, I can get the membrane, your membrane, and I can peel it off the wall. They're doing this massive, around one of the hospitals, massive walk through area, promenade area. And he said, oh, I can get your membrane, I can peel it off the face of the planter boxes. And I said, the first thing I said to him is, why are you peeling the membrane? Membranes are not designed to, you know, they're not judged on peel strength. The only time we do peel strength is when we're working with carpet or vinyl, where we grab it and we test it by putting calipers on it with weights, and we pull it back and we measure our peel strength. But everything that you guys work with is bond strength. So it's like a roll of sticky tape. You can grab it from the end and peel it back, but you grab it 10 mil from the end and you can't peel it back. You're dealing with bond strength. So I said to the guy, why are you peeling the membrane? You should be pinching at it to try and see what that bond strength is. The second thing I said to him is, oh, what are you seeing on the back of the membrane? You know, and he's gone, oh, I can see dust and dirt. And I'm like, right, so, okay. So you didn't, you know, do your preparation. So we'll talk about preparation, but a real key thing is in preparation. So it's spelt out in these work method statements. The next thing is, you know, how to prepare your substrate. So screeds, you know, I think, And one of the big things we talked about in landscaping years ago was, you know, it's gone from the days that just everything can be put into mud. It just can't be anymore. You know, landscaping has come, you know, into an area where, you know, guys are laying 20 mil porcelain, or they're laying a stone that's moisture sensitive, you know, that kind of thing. So it can't just be, that thought process of just putting it onto mud, you know, needs to be, you know, manipulated, needs to be thought about. So, and definitely, you know, when we watch those shows on TV, putting things on sand beds, like, you know, I'm not really a believer of that as well. But, you know, I know it happens, and I know it has to happen sometimes. So then we go into waterproofing, talking about why we need it. So we'll go into that later. What it does to a system, really important. Like, that's what I said to that guy yesterday morning. In that particular stone, it should have been waterproofed, you know, screeded, waterproofed, or, you know, have his concrete down nicely and then waterproof. So basically what we do is we reduce the amount of water that's sitting in the system that's going to be drawn up into that stone when the sun shines on it, you know. So, and, you know, that not only does it cause problems with moisture sensitive stone, but it also causes problems like efflorescence and stuff like that. So, or grouting issues. So we'll talk about Mapelastic Smart. We're going to even mix, we're not mixing any up today, but if you want us to, we can, because I know there's a lot of people that use Mapelastic Smart for the first time and say, oh, it's too hard to use, you know, but 9 times out of 10 it's because of the way they mixed it. Just a bit of a, this will go in a second, but just the way to mix it properly, we're going to talk about how to mix things properly. So substrate preparation, when I had my team, you know, if I ever wanted to fire my old man up, I would pretend I was starting work without a bucket of water and a sponge. So he's 91, still going, and he's still as fiery as ever. So I can still stir him up and not clean something, and he lets loose. So I said to him just the other day, I'm surprised you've lived so long, you know, that you've fucking fires up and still carries on like a pork chop. So I taught myself not to swear when I first started with Mapei, and I always say to him, that was you that caused me to have to learn not to swear. So he's, but, you know, but anyway, so yeah, mixing it up, that's the time about mixing. It's, if you don't mix it for the right amount of time. I was up in Darwin about 7 weeks ago, and they said, we cannot use this up in these areas, it's too hot, blah, blah, blah. I went up there and I said, all right, well, let's mix it. So we mixed it. I said to them, you show me how you're mixing. You know, they just put their liquid in, poured their powder in, gave it about a minute or so, and said, okay, now you try and use it. And I'm like, well, hang on, like, you haven't even done it right. So, you know, I said to them, mix it, the first mix should be 5 minutes. So literally look at your watch and go, okay, you know, 5 past, we're going to be, you know, letting it slack. So we step back, mix it for 5 minutes, step back, let it sit for 3 or 4 minutes, and then come back and give it another 3 or 4 minutes, or even up to 5 minutes. And once we did that, we started using it, and they were all, you know, there was a few, oh, well, I'm not allowed, be careful, I've got HR now and I have to be careful how I speak, but a few others that they thought I'd done a magic trick. They were walking around looking, where's the extra liquid? I'm going, there's no extra liquid, you know. So we just mixed it up, and even after an hour and a half, we sat down and talked about things, and they came back and said, oh, look, it's skinned. And I just peeled the skin off, and then we started using it again. So yeah, it's just a bit of technique. So we're going to talk about adhesive selection. I talk about this a lot because a lot of people walk into shops, hardwares, whatever, wherever you're buying your gear from, you know, and they'll scan and go, oh, what's the cheapest one? You know, I don't understand that process, and in fact I have meetings with our opposition, and I always say to them, why are you in this race to hurt our industry? You know, why are you in the race to take good products or good components out of a bag adhesive to make a shit adhesive that you know, has the potential to fail? You know, so and yeah, they often say to me, "Oh, but you know, you guys have got the bulk of the market, you know, so we got to do something." I say, well, you know, we've got the bulk of the market because we actually, you know, introduce ourselves and talk to our end users. So yeah, it's not about that. The difference of you know, the average bag of adhesive with you guys using a 10, 12 mil notch trowel, which we'll go through sizes of trowels later, but the average bag is around 5 square metres, you know, so the difference of a difference of $10 a bag is $2 a square metre if you kind of bring it out, you know. So $2 a bag is 40 cents a square metre. So it's not worth thinking about, but the technology that's taken out of those bags to get them down to be that $10 cheaper is massive, you know. So they take polymer out of a bag, you know, it's $1.25. They take resins out of a bag, you know, it's another $1.20, you know, so and so on. So they take the good components out. So, but when it comes to thinking about adhesive, because as I say, not everything can be just put straight into mud these days. So when it comes to thinking about adhesive, we ask these 3 questions: the type of tile or stone, type of substrate, and then the type of environment that you're putting it into. So, you know, is it a pool surround? Is it a dark coloured granite or paver, you know, that's 800 by 400? Because remembering the darker the stone, the larger the stone, the more heat it takes on, so that more thermal expansion and contraction is going to take place, you know. So we're going to talk about movement joints later on. I was up in Townsville a couple of weeks ago, and this bloke showed me this pool surround he had done. And I'm talking, in fact, it was 3 weeks ago, and it was 30-something degrees, and they were whinging that it was cold, but I was boiling. And, but I said to him, put your hand on this paving, and you know, he had to take his hand off after about 8 or 9 seconds. And I said to him, if you're taking your hand off after that amount of time, your paving is probably up around 70 degrees. So, you know, and then the kids come home from school, jump in the pool and do their best bomb, and the splash comes out and hits those pavers. It cools them down, you know, at a rapid rate. So they're talking about something that's been sitting there all day, you know, like this, and then it cools down and goes like this. Not unlike your shower. You know, at night your shower sits there at kind of 14, 15 degrees, whatever you keep your house at. You jump in the morning and you flick your mixer on and you put, you know, 40, 50, 60 degree water on there. That expansion is going to take place. So people often forget about that. So thinking about what you're going to lay is step number 1. So as I said to that guy yesterday, and I'm talking a 40 mil stone. So you imagine the power that it takes to warp even a 20 mil stone, but a 40 mil piece of stone, the power that takes. We've done tests up in our lab in Brisbane where we put dynabolts into the corners of stone, and then we you know, put water onto them. We normally just use a wet cloth or wet towel on top. The power, it actually pulls either the bolts up or it pulls the, you know, it causes a hole into the paver itself. So, you know, if I got even this plastic table, but if I got this piece of glass or perspex at 10 mil and I put it over something and, you know, you and I stand on the corner, we'd be lucky to bend it. So you imagine what that strength or that tension that's taking place to actually warp a piece of stone. So has anyone come across that where you've got 4 drummy corners and solid in the middle? You ever? Sometimes you should go back to your jobs and do that, knock on the corners. So we did that probably back 20 years ago when I don't know if you were at that one in Port Melbourne where we talked about thin bluestone.
No, I remember that period of time as well.
Yeah. We and it was an awkward situation for me that night. I don't know if you were there, Jordan, but the speaker that spoke before me, and it was for Landscape Vic, the speaker that spoke before me was up there talking about how good it is to have thin stone these days. They can fit more into a container and, you know, less weight for the boys to be lugging around. And I'm sitting in there, I'm sitting thinking, shit, I'm just about to bag this guy, like, you know, and not him personally, and not stone, but I'm about to say you cannot put that stone onto mud without it ending up being, you know, warped like this. You know, you just can't, you can't do it, you know. Especially when stone started getting bigger, you know, the metre by 1500s started coming out. Rectangular format in some stones it's just prone to that warping taking place. So we started talking about that. So thinking about that, and if you got concerns, you know, call us. If we don't know about it, we do dimensional stability testing on stone for heaps and heaps of companies. You know, they bring stone into the country, they ring us up, they say, we're bringing this stone into the country. You know, they've already got it here, but they say, can you test it? You know, sometimes we come back to them. We had one yesterday. I came back to them, I said, mate, that stone's shit. Oh, we've got containers of it here. What are we going to do? So we said, okay, well, it's going to have to be laid like this. So you have to explain to your people that are buying it that it's going to cost more money, you know, to lay. So that's when this kind of comes into it, where they say, yeah, well, you know, I'm going to match Dave, but to do it properly, I'm going to need to charge you this because this is what's going to take place, you know. So thinking about that. And then just what we're dealing with. So, you know, is it a driveway? Is it a pool surround? You know, where are we actually working to, you know, it's a good idea to understand those type of things to work out what's going on. So I won't go too heavy into it, but good quality adhesives have this on the bag. What it is, this series of letters and numbers actually relate to what should be in the bag. So the other thing that we do a lot for in the industry is we have opposition send us product for us to test, to say to them, yeah, your product's okay or not. Quite often they'll come up, they send us up bags that have got these series of letters and numbers on there, and we'll ring them back or we'll write back to them and say, so this just means cement-based, 2 means modified, fast setting, thixotropic, so it can handle heavy loads, then how it can handle thermal expansion and contraction. I'll go a bit, and then 1 is, you know, how much polymer basically is in a bag. We quite often send back to them and say, you've written that on your bag, but it's not a C2, it's not a fast set, it doesn't handle load, and it's not the deformability of it is crap. And they'll go, thanks, no problem. They still put it out on the market, you know. So anyway, that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So then we're going to talk about techniques. It's even amazing how many tilers out there. As I say, I was in Brisbane last week where it's a licensed trade, and I probably spoke to, I'll be conservative and say about 150 people. And when I did, we're going to use a glass tile to show you what it looks like underneath, but I reckon about 130 of them said, shit, I've never seen that before, I've never done that before. So we're going to talk about technique, but we talk about the adhesive selection again in that work method statement, so as a normal set or a fast set, so depending on what you need. So that's that S that I said, it's very important, but it talks about deformability. So as I say, if you're using large, dark coloured stone, think about that. So it's not only the stone that moves, but it's also the substrate that moves as well. So people forget about that. You know, I know landscapers, and Simon mentioned this morning that there was another group that was going to come today, but they had to continue working, and we see it all the time, just working in the rain. Like it's not something I didn't do either. So I'm not saying it's, but the reality is, water into a process can actually harm things. So, and I'll talk about that a bit later on as well. So as I said, polymer, that's what that S1 or S2 is about. Really, when you've got the S1s or the S2s, the S2 is if you are laying dark coloured stone outside, think about it, because basically an S2 is double the strength of an S1. So when we talk about flexibility, big thing in our industry, you know, back when I started my early days at Mapei, we used to have this thing with our adhesive in these strips, and they said to me, you know, and remember, I came off the tools. I left school. In my family, you left school at 15, you had a trowel put in your hand. The next thing I was trying to sell adhesive. I was a lost sheep, I can tell you. After 2 weeks, I said to my wife, I've made a big mistake. I gave my business to a guy that had been with me for 12 years, and I was almost ready to ring him up and say, I'm coming back. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, you know. So, but we used to have this thing where we'd have these strips of adhesive, and you can get your adhesive and go like this. We go, oh, you know. The first time they showed me that, I said, that is the biggest load of shit I've ever seen. So I was like a truth factor that came into the business too, where I just say, I'm not going and talking to people about that. That's bullshit, you know. If I walk into a backyard or a driveway that you guys are doing and your concrete's doing this, I'm not saying an S2 is going to help you. I'm saying, mate, you got to build this properly to, you know, for it to work, you know. So the old don't accept someone else's mistake, because then it becomes your problem, you know. My old man used to always say, never try and fix someone else's problem, because it becomes your problem, and then when it becomes a problem, they say, well, you touched it, you fix it now, you know. So yeah, so we don't worry about this kind of thing. You know, if we walk into to do a feature wall and it's moving around like this, you know, the amount of times I walk onto balconies and, you know, I'll go like this and I look at the builder and they go, oh, your membrane should be able to handle that, shouldn't it? I'm like, no, you build it right and then we'll come back and do the job. So yeah, it's not the be all and end all, but it is something will help you. So an S2, if you're doing works above 3 metres, we would go into an S2, and we'll talk about techniques of actually using them later on. So we basically developed this range for landscaping industry. It's a high build product, but it can handle load. So you've got to be careful sometimes when, you know, the lesser grade products, you know, you put a 20 or 30 mil paver onto it, it's just going to go wham down in, and, you know, all your adhesive's going to end up in your grout joins. So, but I won't go too much into that. I won't go. So making sure your substrate's right. This is something that we see a lot of. So, you know, I know that concrete, and it's interesting to talk about concrete, because one of the changes that's coming into with the NC, so the national codes, one of the changes that's coming into the industry is that we're going to go back 35, 40 years ago, where concrete used to have a fall. That was your primary fall for your substrate. So it's still in discussion, because you know, the likes of me, when I sit in these meetings with the codes or the standards, we sit in these meetings and I say, good luck getting a concreter now that can actually create fall, you know, at 1 in 100. So, you know, a screed or a mud bed is going to be actually deemed as not a satisfactory bedding for a waterproof substrate or for shedding water, you know. So it's going to be very interesting. There's, as I say, it could take years before it comes in, but it's certainly on discussion. So, but basically, if you've got your concrete up and down like this, and you are doing an adhesive fix, you know, your trowel's going to follow that undulation, and then you're going to put, you know, a large format piece of stone onto it. You know, there's just times where it's just not going to come into full contact with the adhesive. So we want that, or at least that, and not this, you know. So, which we'll talk about later, and we'll show you with the glass tile when we do that later. So, you know, it just means sometimes you might need to actually smooth out what you've left there. So with a patching compound, or, you know, just a slurry mix that's going to actually create some consistency in your concrete. So then there's troweling in lines. So, you know, we don't, I always say that these trowels, I'm almost 60 and I started a fitness campaign last night and my back's fucked. I told you I'm getting better at it. So I always say to people, these are not designed to create patterns, unless you want to leave it. Like we did a job in Fitzroy at the town hall there, you'll see our adhesive's actually all been swirled and it's been left there, you know. But when we're laying a product into it, they're not designed to make patterns. They're designed to gauge your adhesive. So we actually always want to trowel in a straight line. So me personally, I reckon it's easier across your body for when you're doing floors, because to try and do it like this is, you know, awkward. But and the reason why we do it is to create contact, you know. It was said years ago, you know, when we're doing a balcony, we would trowel with our notches going in the direction of the drain, you know, or in the direction to fall off the actual balcony itself. So they were, you know, architects would come on to us and say, oh, these ridges are designed to guide water. And like, you know, when I was a young fella, I was like, you know, I'd never seen adhesive till I was about 20 years old. We just did everything in sand cement, you know. So I never knocked sand cement. My old man still sand cement. He says, if it can't be done sand cement, it can't be done. And I said, Dad, I've been using glue now for 30 years, you know, so give me a break. But it's not for that at all. So what it is when we use adhesive, we want to actually move the stone across those ridges and close those ridges up so we get as close to 100% contact as possible. And the reason being is that, you know, if I start to swirl, now which way do I move my... I had a young bloke last week when I was up in Brisbane and we talked about this, and he goes, oh no, I just get my stone and I just move it around like this. And I'm like, come on mate, you don't do that the whole time. And anyway, it was quite amusing because there was about 80 people there and they all just held him down. I didn't even have to say a word, but so yeah, and you know, we also see problems. You know, there's a famous problem out at Melbourne Airport. It's been probably, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years, where some stone was laid at the Virgin check-in area. The stone warped, so the installers were actually taken out of the equation for the problem because the whole lot had to be ripped up and replaced. When the inspector came in, he was, I won't mention his name because you probably know him, but he's never swung a trowel in his life before, but he's out there telling our industry, you know, how to do things. But anyway, he came onto the job, and when they pulled up the first piece of stone and the adhesive looked like this, he actually said, you're back in because you've done incorrect troweling or incorrect laying techniques. So he dragged the installer back in, who went out of business like that because it was a 7-figure fix-up. So, but yeah, just saying the importance of it. So yeah, it's not about guiding water, it's about maximising coverage or contact. So the more amount of adhesive we have, so even in slurries, we're going to do screeds later, but even in slurries, the more contact we have, the stronger the overall bond is. So when I talked about that kind of flexibility, or this kind of flexibility, we actually talk about that bond strength that I talked about before. So the stronger it's held down, the stronger the system's going to be, the more thermal expansion and contraction it can handle, you know, that kind of thing. So that's what we're actually talking about. So yeah, so that's just showing you what we're going to show you when we get up there. If you need to pack up, don't do blobs. Blobs are no good. We actually would do the double notching method, and we always would do that again in the same direction. So not that. You know, you can see in my fingers there all these gaps that I've got. You know, when people do and we see this on facades or feature walls a lot, where people will trowel in one direction and then they do the opposite on the stone, and I'll say to them, well, you know, now you've probably got 50% contact, you know, especially when we've got spillover walls, you know, with water constantly coming through them all day, you know. So wherever we've got those voids, wherever we've got these voids, we've got area where water and air can accumulate, and air and water, when it heats up, expands and wants to push something off, you know. So when we've got a weak bond and we've got a lot of something behind it trying to push it off, you know, you can work out that it just doesn't work out, you know. So yeah, we try and maximise the coverage. So when we do that, we try and do that. So spot bonding, you know, like we get called onto a job like that and people say, oh, your adhesive's failed. You know, first thing I say to them is try using some, you know, and then I say to them, you know, this is just bad technique. So I also put that photo in there for the landscaping industry to see. Blue board is not a substrate to put stone on. Blue board is rated to 7 kilos per square metre for weight. So it's designed for paints or texture coats, maybe a render, but that's it. So, you know, when I said before about rubbing your hand onto your substrate and having a look at your hand, if you rub your hand on the blue board, you have a look and your hand's blue, you know. And we have instances where stone comes off a wall and, you know, if I'm in the car driving along and I say to them, what are you seeing, you know? And they say, oh, the adhesive stuck to the back of the stone, but it's come off the wall. And I say, okay, what's your wall? You know, oh, blue board. And I say, what's on the back of the adhesive? Blue. And I say, all right. So, you know, so yeah, think about the right substrate for the right job. There is different ratings. So stone sheet, there's another two that have escaped my Easy Lap, those kind of products. You know, they're designed for 40 and 50 and the CSR one's up to 60 kilos per square metre. So if you're doing a lightweight structure and you want to bond something to something, especially when you're going high, make sure you got the right substrate. Masonry's the best, of course, but if you can't do it, then in lightweight. So as I say, the better the coverage, increases the strength, less water behind it, reduces movement, pressure, failure, and then chances of cracking is reduced when we haven't got this kind of thing going on. And I tell you, we see this, I've seen this, we're dealing with one in Hawthorne at the moment that goes up about 4 stories, you know. So, and they called me onto the job and I got there and went, shit, this should be cordoned off, and you know, hard hats and shoulder pads to walk in here because this is dangerous, so rip it all down. So, and that's literally take it all down and start again. So, and it was all, you know, I probably should have even put these photos into this because it's our new latest Hall of Shame, but it's a terrible job. So I'll go into grout just briefly, but I want to stress the importance of grout. Grout can make or break your job. So, and I know that you're probably sitting there thinking, we mainly use sand cement. That's fine. I've got no issues with it at all. As I say, I'm a sand cement person, but there is different options. And I just wanted to go through just a couple of golden rules that we see, and we're only going to talk about 3 in here, but we have 15 that we talk about. But you know, people having blotchy grout when they are using a specific colour. I don't know if that's grouts. People ring us up all the time and say, I've used your grey grout and it's, you know, blotchy, you know, I'll go out onto the job. There's a couple of reasons why, and in the landscaping fraternity, a lot of it is just basically because you've grouted while everything's still wet. So, you know, you might do the job, and we're not mixing up grout, but we'll talk about grout. Yeah, you might mix it properly, but then to go and put it over something that's still green or wet, or, you know, grouting on a day like today, and I see it, don't worry about that, you know. I say, at least get a tarp up, you know, at least give it a chance, you know. So at Mapei, we own 27% of the grout market. The other 10 companies that make grout, they fight it out for the other 70, you know. So we sell a lot of grout, tons and tons of grout, you know. People ring us up and say, oh, you must have a faulty batch. A batch for us is 9 pallets. You know, it's about 720 kilo bags. It's about, you know, 3,000 5 kilo bags, you know. I don't know if I'm pointing at grout there, so grout, doesn't matter. We, you know, we have the best QA without a doubt. And so it doesn't get out onto the market without our chemist saying, yep, tick, off it goes, you know. So in my 30 years, I've never had a problem that wasn't caused by something else. Never. So think about drying times, think about scheduling your jobs, you know. And I talk about this with big jobs, you know, like, you know, paved areas, like we're doing the jam factory that's coming up. There's, I don't know, there's about 15,000 square metres of paving. I've said to them, because they're about to start, I said to them, I hope you've scheduled that you're in Melbourne, you know, that we're going to have rain and so on, you know. I'm lucky enough I get to go to Italy every September and sit with our chemists over there. And the first thing I do with them, and I've been doing it for 28 years going over there, I grab them and I walk them out and I say, boys, you know, and there's hundreds of them, you know, there's be 300 or 400 chemists there, like it's massive, this thing. I walk, you know, the ones that I deal with, I walk them out and I point and I say, see that yellow thing, you know, or see those grey things, or feel that, that's rain, or feel that, that's wind. That's what these guys are dealing with, you know. They sit in a lab that's 23 degrees, 50% humidity, 365 days a year. They just, you know, they develop great products, you know. Before we have 9,600 products, and in some of those lines, there's 3,000 or 4,000 products in those lines. So they know what they're doing, but they don't understand the environment that you guys are working in. So yeah, making sure everything's cured or dried. Cured, not so, because, you know, 28 days and I know you'd never get anything done. And I know you want to keep going, but, you know, just thinking about what's coming at you. So if you're going to grout today and you know it's going to rain tomorrow, think about it, cover it, you know, because it's going to alter. So what happens is you call us up and you say, I've got this kind of going on, you know, we've got a fair idea what took place in the first place, you know. So measuring your water, out of all those products that we have that I just said, there's 2 products that I say you always should measure your water. So literally getting a jug. Oh, fitness is bloody overrated. You know, getting one of these or getting one of our buckets that's got measurements on it. You know, when I had my team, I had, you know, my labourers that were always mixing grouts or glues or whatever. I would get buckets and I would literally drill holes into them, or get my grinder and cut slots into them, so they could never overfill that bucket. So they could just pour it in there. When it stopped shedding water, they'd go, right, that's what he likes, bang, pour it into their bucket and mix, you know. So the levelling compounds, which you guys will probably never use, but grouts is a big thing where I say measure your water. The difference of even 10 mil of water can make a big difference, you know, especially with grouts that are, you know, grouts are not grout anymore. Grouts are actually technology again in a bag, like an adhesive. It's technology in a bag. So before it was sand cement, mix it up, you know. I never measured the actual sand cement because I knew the feel of it, you know. Out of the 4 boys, we all like slightly different water in our screed mixes, you know. So we even like different sand. My older brother liked a real coarse sand, and then, you know, as it got down to me, I was like, oh, I like it a bit finer, you know, would move across my straight edge better and stuff, you know. So So, but we never compromised when we started using grouts, because we started seeing problems and we thought, well, let's just mix it the same way every single time. Then we know if we got a problem, something else has taken place, you know. So measure your water. This is what happens. I always relate it to cement. The job of a cement particle is to wrap itself around all the other stuff that's in the bag, like resins and sand or aggregate. That's the job of the cement, to wrap itself around and to actually create that strength. So I always relate it to like fingers. So, you know, they grow like that to wrap themselves around something. So the longer they get, the better the hug, you know. So, you know, that's why back in the day we used to pour concrete, we'd put hessian on it and we'd hose it for 28 days, you know, keep it wet, keep it slow the drying down. The slower things dry with cement in it, the stronger they actually get, unless they're designed as a fast setting or rapid set product. So that's what I always relate it to. So giving too much water can weaken those fingers or not allow them to dry properly, you know, or stretch properly. And likewise with not enough water. And then of course, blotchiness comes into play. So again, allowing mix, weight, mix, you know, very important. So I always say to people with cement-based products, you know, the first mix agitates everything, gets everyone awake, you know. Then you let it sit and relax for a second, you know, let it spread, and then we mix it again and get it to, you know, create that finger or the hug thing, you know. That's why concrete trucks, when they leave the yard, they're spinning at a certain rate, then they'll slow it down, and then when they get to site, they spin it again, you know. That's exactly what it's all about. So just think about that. The other thing that I don't think, it creates the workability or the open time of the products as well. So even glues, you know, if you just mix it once, like I said with those guys up in Darwin, just mix it once and try and use it, it's not going to work the way that chemist designed it to work. It's going to want to dry fast. It's going to want to be stiff. You know, people ring me up and say, oh, I'm using your glue, but you know, I'm going to end up with arms like Popeye. You know, I say, well, you haven't mixed it enough. Go back and mix it again. You know, they go, oh, but I've already mixed it. You know, I say, no, mix it again. You know, so workability and open time. So it means it won't dry too fast. So never try and bring it back to life with water. So we have what we call water retention in the product. So you can, you know, a bag of Keraflex, which I'm sure probably some of you have used, actually got a pot life of 6 to 8 hours, you know. So, but it will start to harden, but you can put your drill back into it and bring it back to life, you know. Or if you've notched it out on your concrete and you got the sunshine and it starts to skin off, you know, because you should always just check your adhesive. Just put your finger into it and make sure that transfer is taking place. If that transfer is not taking place, that adhesive is gone. So, but run your trowel back through it, you can bring it back to life. So run your trowel back through it, touch it again. If it's good, go for it. If it's not, scrape it up and chuck it away. You know, it's so much cheaper. I did a presentation a while ago for a company that has 300 installers, you know. So you can imagine the amount of product he goes through. Multi-million-dollar customer to us. But he, and I said to his guys, Justin, who owns the company, I said, Justin won't care if you throw away $5 of adhesive or $5 of grout, but you have the job done properly, you know. So it's a lot cheaper to throw away this much grout, chuck it in the bin and mix up another batch and have it work properly than to come back and, you know, walk into your client, oh yeah, sorry about that, you know, scratch it back out and redo it, you know, or ring me and say, are your grout stuffed? You know, and I'll say, oh, yeah, I'll come out and have a look, you know. So chuck it away when you can't bring it back to life, because those fingers that I talked about, when you add water back to the mix, you actually break those fingers, so you get that kind of thing going on, you know. So it just weakens the product. I won't talk about that. One thing that we didn't put into this, and my fault, is when you have got porous stone, which you guys will deal with a lot. So if your stone's super porous, just before you grout, just dampen it down. So dampen down. I don't mean get a hose and flood the shit out of everything. I mean just dampen it down. Like, you know, we used to get atomizer bottles, or we would get our hose and just mist it, and just mist everything down to just put a little bit of moisture into the stone to stop that, basically the shock, you know. It just dries the products out so fast that you end up with problems. So, you know, people ring me up and say, oh, I've used your light grey grout and it's dried dark, you know, and I come out and I see it's sandstone or, you know, something like that. I say, unfortunately what happened, the water was sucked out of it so quickly that it didn't have a chance to actually do what it wanted to do, you know. So just think about that, you know, just dribble some water onto it. If that water's gone in a second, think it's going to drag that water out of your mix or your grout. It's going to drag it out too quickly. So just dampen it down. So what the water does, it actually does a couple of different things. And I should have said this right back at the preparation stage. So when we had that sponge wipe, the water does three things. It cleans, so it makes something ready to bond to something, because we don't want to have layers between our adhesive or whatever we've got, you know. So we don't want to have layers. So the water cleans. It puts a bit of moisture into the porous area so that everything dries at an even consistency. So we don't have things drying fast, slow. It creates weak points in those areas, you know. So we want to have something drying nice and evenly. The other thing that the water does, when I go and put something wet back over the top of it, so like grout into the edge of the stone or adhesive onto the concrete or onto your screed or render, whatever you got, it doesn't just snap dry it. But what it does is that moisture that we've put into the substrate, it can't come up through here because it's hitting more moisture. So what it actually does is it retreats back into the porous area and drags everything down with it. So we do a lot of core testing on even like cement sheet, where we wet it down or dampen it down. I've got to use the word dampen it down, as opposed to just putting adhesive straight onto it. We see a difference of, you know, it might be nothing of a millimetre, but there is a difference that it actually drags it further into the product. So in particular, screeds, renders and concrete. So that water's a good thing. I won't bother talking about the range. I won't bother talking about that. They're all just, it just is the difference, and probably why we own a lot of the market is because we put things into the grout, like our drop effect is basically chemical that gives the grout a higher water resistance. So it makes it roughly about 90% waterproof. So not 100, but 90%. So what that means is that it gives you time to clean something up. So if your clients are outside having a barbecue and they spill sauce or red wine or whatever onto the stone, and they ring you up and say, you know, my grout stained. The difference is with a sand cement, for example, that staining will take place very quickly. With manufactured grouts with this type of technology into it, they could go to bed that night, wake up with a hangover and just come out and clean it up, you know, and it's going to clean up. So that's kind of a difference. Minimising mould, the same thing, we put this into it as well, so minimise mould, so but that's more. But what this particular product does have is very unique to Mapei. Mapei own the rights to the type of cement that goes into this product. It contains no lime, so we don't get any efflorescence at all, zero. So if someone rings me up and says, I've used your ultra colour and I've got efflorescence, I say it's not coming from the ultra colour. It physically cannot come from the ultra colour. It doesn't contain lime. So when we talk about efflorescence a bit later, it'd be it'll be, I'll bring it up. But the other thing is it's a fast curing product. So it's cured in 4 hours. So if you do know it's going to rain tomorrow, you use a product like that, you know you're going to be okay. Where if we use standard products, we're probably going to have a problem, you know. So just designed for large joints as well. So efflorescence. This is a big topic that we talk about a lot. So I'm sure you've probably, well, I would assume that you've probably had issues with efflorescence over time. So we get it a lot. Dealing with a big one at the Melbourne Tennis Centre at the moment, a big at the Grand Staircase. It's been done 3 times. Rough cost about $300,000 every single time it's been done. So we call it the $1 million staircase now. And they finally went to the system. When I got to the job in the first day, I said to them, can't do it like this, it's got to be done like this with these particular products that don't contain lime, because we have, you know, sand cement that doesn't contain lime. We have adhesives that don't contain lime. We have patching compounds that don't contain lime. We have membranes and so on and so on. I said, we've got to do it like this, but it's going to cost you, you know, X amount of dollars. At the start, they said, no, we're going to lay it this way. So I'm like, I write to people and say, well, you've chosen to do it this way. I'll see you in 6 months, you know. I think I wrote 4 months on that one because it was coming into summer. We call September efflorescence season because everything sat there wet over winter. All that water's in there, mixing with all the lime-based products, cement, lime, mixing with the lime, and then September, as we actually start to heat up and the sun starts to shine on things and draws that lime-infused water up, we start to get the phone calls. Oh, I've got calcium or lime, whatever they want to call it, and stalagmites coming out of my balcony, coming out of my staircase. And we say, yep, we're ready for you. So yeah, they did it that way the first time. It looked like, I said to him, you should put lights into it and sell it as a feature, you know, like Jenolan Caves, the Buchan Caves, you know. It was unbelievable. And anyway, they said, all right, okay, yeah, all right, we're going to rip it apart. So they ripped it apart. I talked to them about drainage, how, you know, all the water coming off the, I don't know if you've ever been into the Melbourne Tennis Centre, but the huge walkways, you know, all that water comes to this staircase and drains down it. And I said, we need to alter the drainage. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, you know. Well, we're going to go part the way. You know, we're going to just do this, and we're going to just do this. We're going to not use that, but we're going to use this, and, you know. I said, no worries, I'll write to them again. This time I'll see you in 8 months, you know. 8 months later, we come back, and so they finally do it. So we deal with it a lot, you know, especially in facades. You've all seen it. You've all driven around jobs, and, you know, we could probably walk out here and probably go into a house, the front of a house, and see it. So efflorescence is everywhere. So our old mate, efflorescence. So, and it's efflorescence. So not effervescence, that's Sweps, you know, that's the ad. So efflorescence, it is a preventable defect. So it's also easily maintained as well. But so the conditions that is how we're dealing with the soluble salts, the moisture that's going to be in the system, and then the evaporation pathway, so what's going to be drawn out of the system. So water entering in, as I said, and the water leaving is now salt infused, to put it in basic terms. And then, so in its first instance, it's actually in a liquid form. So, and then, you know, we're lucky we live in an area where we've got rain, even though Melbourne doesn't have much rain, but we have rain, washes it away. No one even sees it, you know. No one cares about it. But when we come into the drier periods, it actually, the next stage is a very powdery form. So again, easily cleaned off, just washed away. When we let it start to calcify and grow, it becomes that stalagmite. We're actually starting to create, you know, a sculpture. So we're going to actually, it's going to need some physical cleaning. So you know, I've written many letters for some of the big tier 1 builders to say that they should talk about efflorescence as not a defect, but a maintenance issue. So, you know, if your customers had efflorescence in their kitchen, they would clean it. But because you guys are working outside and they think, oh, let's just leave it for winter. Let's just leave it, you know. Like swimming pools, let them go green for winter. Then they come and just bomb the hell out of it, you know, come spring, and then they wonder why they have issues with grout or, you know, calcification in swimming pools. So I say to them, you know, in your handover documents, you know, it's a good thing to have a maintenance schedule for you to hand to your client and say, all right, I'm finished here. You've paid me to keep this looking good. This is how you can actually maintain your job, you know, or your house, your backyard, your pool surround, you know. So it keeps them thinking, well, yeah, you can't just expect, you know, mould to, you know, people ring us up and say, oh, I've used your silicon and it says mould free on it and I've got mould. And I go, the mould's free, you know, have it. But I say, clean the bloody shit. Like, it doesn't come with a bloke in this tube that gets out every 2 or 3 months and scrubs their, you know, their grout joint or their silicon joint. It actually has to be maintained. So, you know, I've done that with a lot of landscapers. Say, when you're leaving the job, give them just a little letter that says, you know, water blast, not hydrochloric acid, don't acid wash. The other name for hydrochloric acid is spirits of salt. So we're putting salt into the system. So we make green acids like phosphoric acid, those kind of things, you know. Give them a schedule to say, hey, use some, you know, phosphoric acid. I think we make one, acid, there it is, acid cleaner. It's a green acid. I could pour this onto my hands and not hurt myself, you know. It's phosphoric. So phosphoric is actually in dishwasher tablets. So we eat off it. If you use a dishwasher and you use tablets, you're probably eating off that kind of thing all the time, you know. So, yeah, you know, even I say to people, give them, I don't know what these are worth, Dave, probably, I don't know, 15 bucks. When you're walking out the door, give them their maintenance schedule, say, there you go, there's a gift for you, look after your backyard, you know, keep it looking good. So yeah, so it's preventable. It's often created because there's not enough fall or incorrect drainage in the actual system itself. So, you know, thinking about that. So when you have got your paving slab set up, put some water onto it and see what's going to actually take place before you put your mud bed or your adhesive bed or whatever you're going to do. Thinking about that. We also think about just layering. So I don't know if I do so many of these, I don't know if I mentioned before, I don't think I did, but you know, if that was up that way, so we've got our paving slab, or our slab, you know, it might be 100 mil, 150 mil, might be 200 mil, but it's a porous piece of cement that's got salts in it, you know. Then we go and put a slurry, and then we put a screed mix or your mud mix over it. We've created another bed, a sponge. So all this contains water and it's got salts in it. So the more base we have, the more salt we've actually got into it. A simple thing is to put a membrane there, and what we do, and this is what I said to this bloke yesterday with moisture sensitive stone, is now instead of having this much water underneath our paver, or this much or whatever it might be, we've only got this much, you know, we've only got the adhesive bed. So very little amount of water that's actually sitting underneath the paver that's taking on that water that's now lime infused and so on. So the less we have, the less efflorescence we're going to actually have in the long term. That's just talking about those with method statements. So I'll just spend 1 minute talking about silicons. Just be aware that there is a difference between, when you're putting silicons into stone, just be aware that the acidic ACs will bleed. So you want the non-bleed silicons, so low modular silicons. Just think about that. We see that all the time, picture framing. People do a beautiful job of laying stone and then they get picture framing because the oils that are in silicons will actually bleed into the stone and create that picture frame look. Just thinking about movement joints, it's quite often missed in the landscaping fraternity. People don't think about them. I always say just allow, because remember we talked about that heat transfer that's going to make the stone want to go. It needs to go somewhere, you know, so it's, and I know it's nothing of a millimetre per piece of stone, but when you add it up over 10 rows, it starts to become a millimetre or more, you know. So it's going to create that tension where everything's sitting there like that until something has to give, you know. The stone won't go down because it can't. It'll actually go up, and that's when drumminess takes place, you know. So just allow for that thermal expansion that's going to take place. Allow for the substrate expansion and movement that's going to take place by putting movement joints in, you know. The Australian standard is every 4.5 metres. They're bringing it into 3.6 metres. If you've got dark coloured stone outside, large format, I would think about bringing it into 3 metre block. So, and I know you're probably thinking, French pattern and Ashlar pattern, you know, these patterns, what am I going to do? If you can't do a straight line, at least follow the pattern just to allow that transfer of movement to take place. Especially when we're coming up against the house or coming up against a garden bed or coming up against a pool, you know, something like that. If we're coming up against something, that's going to want to move at a different rate to the paving as well. So we need to cater for that with a movement joint. So really important to have movement joints. They should be a minimum of 6 millimetres, minimum. You know, realistically into a 10. If you've got a 10 mil joint, do a 10 mil joint, you know. But make sure those movement joints are completely free of any rigid debris. So if your mud beds come up into it, or your adhesive bed or whatever, or, you know, your bit of grout's fallen into it, get it out, you know. If we walk onto a job and people, you know, have got peaking pavers like this, and they'll say, oh, but, you know, I put a movement joint into them. You know, I just get a key or something and I just put it into the movement joint and see if it's a 20 mil paver, that movement joint should be 20 mil. So, but 20 mil is too much for silicon or polyurethane. So we need to have a backing rod, you know, to take up the bulk of it. So realistically, for a movement joint to work, it should be no greater in width than it is in depth. So if we've got a 10 mil joint, it should go no greater than 10 mil deep, because otherwise what it does, it creates, the silicon will actually harden to a point where it won't compress anymore. So we need to think about that and put some foam into it. And then, but it needs to be free of anything rigid, otherwise it's going to come up against itself, you know. I see some pavers out on the market where they're, you know, they come to you guys and they're beveled, you know, so they're kind of sitting like that. And so for you guys to make a 10 mil joint, you basically have to touch the bottom of the paver together. And I've spoken to some of our paver manufacturers and said that's a really bad design, you know. So because no matter what you guys do at the top, the paver's pressing against itself and it's going to want to push up when it wants to expand, you know. It doesn't only, these pavers and stones don't only expand with heat, they also take on water. And they, you know, you put water into something, it's going to want to expand as well. So you got to think about that. So movement joints are real critical, and yeah, I just see a lot of it where it's just ignored in the landscape area. I just talked about that. AC, yeah, we use AC for swimming pools, but yeah, not into stone. So LM, so neutral cure is what I'm saying, non-bleeding type silicons. So just think about that when you are doing your silicon suggestion. Yeah, so that's what you'll end up with if you use the wrong silicon. We see that a lot. I'm going to finish there. I'm going to, I'll go off that. Oh, thought I was done. Just talking about the academy. We have our academy in Port Melbourne. It's moving out to Truganina when we have our new factory, but so I know people out this side of town are probably never going to come out there, but the guys in Geelong are wrapped. So, but yeah, so yeah, this is the kind of thing we do. And as I say, I don't do it for, you know, shits and giggles. I do it to actually, you know, hopefully instill something. I hope that you walk out of here today with just one little thing in your head, you know, even if it's not. I love walking onto a site, and this happened to me the other day, and a bloke rubbed his hand onto his concrete and went, look at that. And I thought, that guy learnt something.